friends, happy new year. I think this video is gonna be out by the new year, so happy new year. Today I wanted to sit down, still in bed, but not because I'm particularly ill anymore, just because it's cozy. Today I wanted to sit down to talk to you about my favorite books of last year. I thought I wasn't gonna film this video. I was like, I've talked about the books before, why would I make a specific video about them? And then I've been watching so many of my favorite booktubers talk about their favorite books, and I was just like, oh, that's why, because it's fun. So these are my favorite books of the year. I will say this is an incredibly subjective list. These are not technically the best books that I read in terms of quality, in terms of, you know, writing style, in terms of you know, award-winning books. These are my favorite books. These are the books that impacted me as a person the most. These are the books that moved me, that challenged me, that changed me. These are the books that did the most of all the books. Before I get into it, I just want to ask you what your favorite books of the year have been. Please leave it in the comments. I want to know, like, what books impacted you the most? What books have changed you the most this year? What books? Leave me the recommendations in the comments, because I always am looking for new books to read. So please leave them in the comments. Some of the best books I read this year, last year, the year before have been recommended by people who love books and people who love talking about the books that they love. So be one of those people in my life and tell me about what books you loved in the comments below. Thank you so much. And now let's get into it. We're gonna do like a countdown, but it's in no particular order. It's just fun to count down. They're all amazing in different ways. Number 10 is To Be a Machine by Mark O'Connell. This is a journalistic account exploring the transhumanist movement that is currently happening under our noses. So basically, it is a group of people mostly around like Silicon Valley and like the tech bros, you know what I mean? People who basically believe that death, who needs her? She can go and she can stay away. And they're trying to solve the problem of death with machines. They think that the natural progression, the ideal towards which humanity is moving is machines. It's kind of wacky and crazy to think that there are so many people, and I'm talking intelligent scientists, I'm talking CEOs of companies, I'm talking, you know, like big names in the tech industry and in the robotics industry and in the neuroscience industry who are genuinely trying to do this. They are genuinely trying to solve the problem of death, and it's freaky. So Mark O'Connell, you know, got his PhD in English. He's an incredible writer. This is a fantastically written book, really compelling. He quotes loads of, you know, really old ancient literature and philosophy that references this theme throughout human history, and he shows how these ideas are really rooted in a long history beyond, you know, the 21st century, but how 21st century technology is really advanced at this point, and loads of people are now making these sort of developments towards solving the problem of death in one way or another. Some people are trying to cryogenically freeze their bodies. Some people are working in neural modeling and neural networks and trying to develop ways of uploading the mind, the brain of a human onto a machine. Other people are trying to improve the body through increasing like machine parts and sort of you know, cyborg technology type of stuff. This book really challenged a lot of ideas that I had about what it meant to be a transhumanist. Not that I really understood anything about it before, but I feel like, you know, there are a lot of arguments in here about what it means to be human through the lens of what it means to try to escape the human condition. And I kind of, at the end of the book, really began to understand why people might be transhumanist, because like the existential deal that we're given, you know, this like situation we call life is rough, and death, being a part of it, is really hard to accept. It's really hard to stomach. It's really just, it's not fair. And so the transhumanists, they're just trying to find a way around it, you know? It is quite wacky on the surface, but I think at the root of it, there is a lot to be said about this being a natural human inclination. And yeah, really, really enjoyed it. That's why it's on the top 10. It's like one of the best nonfiction books that I've read in a long time. Next, we have How to Do Nothing, Resisting the Attention Economy by Jenny Odell. This book got butchered by a friend of mine who I will never loan a book to again. She literally demolished it. Do you see this? Do you see this? I gave it to her in near perfect condition, and this is what I get. Makes me upset just looking at it. But anyway, so this is a book that is very much of its place. I would say it's a book that I really engaged with, I really appreciated, but I also feel like not everyone would appreciate it. And some of the things involved here include, you know, long discussions of modern art, long discussions of bird watching and nature and being connected to nature. And I think that those things were important when it comes to giving you an alternative of like, what do you do without the internet? Like, what do you do when you resist the attention economy? Like, how do you do that? Like, okay, watch birds and, you know, feel connected to your local plants, animals, humans, etc. Like, just kind of re-engage with community things, re-engage with art, slow down. So in that sense, those things were a necessary part of the book. But in another sense, when you read the title, How to Do Nothing, it's kind of misleading. It makes it feel like it's a self-help book that's going to be like really easy to read, and it's not. This, if anything, is kind of an activist manifesto. It's kind of a social critique and a call to action. For all of its flaws that I mentioned before, the fact that it's written in the Bay Area, it's written from the west coast of the US, it's written by someone who's grown up there and lives there now. So it's not really an international or an intersectional book in that sense, but it is a book that really is super well researched and has amazing arguments in here that I'd never considered before when it came to thinking about the attention economy and its issues. So one of those things that really blew my mind and really changed the way that I see engagement with internet, and especially like certain social media platforms like Instagram. I mean, I would say Twitter, but I don't use Twitter, but like, you know, this super fast paced social media is this idea of censorship, and how censorship is not always about stopping speech, but sometimes it's about forcing speech. And that is a form of censorship. And that, I think that's probably the key insight that like really rocked my boat and made me rethink the way that I use my platforms online, but also the way that I engage with other people's platforms online, and the sort of the political consequences of that kind of form of censorship was really, really interesting. And Jenny Odell does give us alternatives to the current ways in which the internet is being used. Of course, she does acknowledge that it's not possible for everyone not to use the internet, and it's not possible to resist the attention economy completely, especially because that's just people's livelihoods at this point. But there are alternatives in here, and there are ways that she inspires you to rethink your own engagement, but also the social engagement and the civic engagement with the attention economy. And I think it's a really powerful exploration. I think it's a really solid critique, and I really enjoyed the bird watching and the art of it all. So yeah, this has been one of the best books and one of the most long-lasting, impactful books that I've read this year, because I've really changed the way that I use social media. Coming in at number 8, we have The YACOUBIAN Building by Alaa El Aswany. This is translated by Humphrey Davies, and it is an Egyptian modern classic. It was published in 2002, and honestly, this book felt like going home. I've been really homesick this whole year. I haven't been able to go back to Egypt, back to Cairo, where I come from, where I was born and raised, where I have a lot of mixed up emotions associated with, and this book felt like taking a trip back home. So it follows an entire building, essentially, and all the different residents of this one building in downtown Cairo called the YACOUBIAN building, Amarat al-YACOUBIAN, and it follows, you know, everyone of all different like genders and classes and sexualities and occupations. And basically this building is a little slice of society, and through the interactions and the dynamics and the storylines of these characters, you get to see all these different facets of what it's like to live in Cairo for different people and how varied that experience is. And I think it's like a phenomenally well written book in terms of character, because every character is so unique, is so either lovable or you hate them in like a very specific way, and it just makes you feel things. It made me feel so many things. It's just a phenomenal book, and it's a modern classic for a reason, and I feel like the commentary that it gives on sex and class and power and just like everything, it's just so well done. I would highly recommend it. And yeah, I mean, obviously touched a really special place for me in my heart and my life, because I am from Cairo and I have been so homesick. This was also the first Egyptian classic that I'd ever read. I connected with it in a really deep way, and it's definitely left its mark. And yeah, I love this book. I would highly recommend it. One of the top 10. Next up, in number 7, we have Strangers, Essays on the Human and Non-Human by Rebecca Tamas. This is a tiny little slim book, and I really cannot emphasize enough how short it is. It is not even 100 pages long, okay? It's an incredibly short book, and for such a short nonfiction essay collection, it packs a punch. This book is so powerful, it's so well researched, it's so accessible, and it is genuinely one of the best books that I read this year, because within the, 5 or 6 essays that are contained in this volume, you get so much information and so much insight into certain issues, mainly the issues of what it means to be human and what it means to live ethically in a world of patriarchal capitalism. The first essay is like one of the longest, and it talks a lot about racism and capitalism and sexism and climate issues, and how all of those things intersect with each other, and how all of those problems can be rooted in basically the same problem. I'd recommend this book to literally anyone. I think it's a really important book for people to read. It was a really important book for me to read. I picked it up on a nice sunny morning in the summer, and I started reading it, and I just kept reading it, and I just couldn't stop reading it, because every essay also builds on the last in a really unique and interesting way. The question of what it means to live in a world that contains more than humanity. Like, what does it mean to actually respect and be hospitable towards and be akin to other creatures that aren't humans? There's essays on the importance of nature and how space and place and natural environments are really crucial to our mental health, but also to our intellectual health. And environments can really move our minds in unique ways, and when we lose those spaces, what kind of thoughts are dying along with those spaces? It's just such a short book that I cannot believe added so much to my life after and during my reading of it. So I really highly recommend it if you're looking to get started in thinking about these questions about the human and the non-human and what that all means. I think this is a really great place to start. Number 6, we have Canto and Othered Poems by Joelle Taylor. This is my favorite poetry collection that I read this year. It is phenomenal. It is phenomenal. So good, so powerful, so good. I don't even know what else to say about it. It's like go pick it up. I just saw that this was nominated for the T.S. Eliot Prize for Poetry this year, and I'm so excited for it because I genuinely, like, I'm so happy it's getting the recognition that it deserves because it's so good. I just can't, don't have language to say anymore how good it is. It's so good. So what it is a poetry collection about Joelle Taylor's experience being a butch lesbian in the 90s and in the 80s, I want to say, probably the 90s, 80s, 90s, you know, in the last century. And her talking about her found family, and the abuse and the grief and the loss and the anger, and the love that they all felt being of that time and of that identity. One of my favorite things about it was the way in which Joelle explores gender and gender presentation and the way that that intersects with her sexuality. I thought it was really, really powerful. Some of her descriptions about the body and about what it is like to occupy a female body in the world, even though you don't want to present it as a female, you don't feel it authentically, like that femininity authentically represents you. There's an epic poem in here called Canto, which is kind of framed as a fighting, like a boxing match. And I actually went to a reading where Joelle Taylor like signed my book and gave me a hug, and it was really sweet. But also performed the poem and talked about the original performance of that poem. Took place in an actual boxing ring, where it was her on one side and like a suit, just like a suit hanging on the other side of the boxing ring. And you know, the bell, you could almost hear the bell in that poem like ringing for each round of just like the fight. The inner turmoil is represented in that poem as a boxing match. And it's beautiful and raw and heartbreaking, and I don't know what else to say. This poetry collection ripped me open. It was beautiful. It was phenomenal. It was so good, and I really think everyone should read it. Just everyone should read it. It's so, so good. Disability Visibility, edited by Alice Wong. These subtitle is First Person Stories from the 21st Century. This is an essay collection written by disabled people of all different backgrounds with all types of disability, disfigurement, chronic illness, from all different races and occupations. So it really has a massive scope, but it's also, I felt like it was too short. This book really challenged me. I read it with the book club, The Reader's Resistance, which has been on hiatus for a while, but it was one of the last books that we read together, and I'm really glad that we read it together because I don't think I could have necessarily sustained reading it on my own. I think it's definitely a hard book to read. Reading about the way in which disabled people are consistently and systematically abused, it just obviously makes anyone with a soul like hurt, you know, to think about. But I think it's so important that it was written and that it was collected, because this is actually the first Own Voices collection of disabled voices to ever be published, which is crazy. Like, it took so long, you know. I'm quite late to the to reading this one and engaging with this topic because it's so important. 1 in 5 people in the US have some kind of disability. I don't know what the statistic is in the UK, but it's the biggest marginalized group of all. And it really, like, disability does not discriminate. Like, doesn't matter where you come from or what your background is, disability is disability, because society is built in such a way to not give access to people with suffering with different conditions. Or born with different conditions. So this was a really illuminating book. You know, learned a lot of stuff from it. Really, really challenging, but super important. And I'm really glad I read it. And I just, some of the essays in here, like, I literally can't stop thinking about. I learned so much and I was impacted so deeply. And I just think everyone should read it. And I really look forward to the day that, you know, this is not the only book or one of, 5 books out there on the topic. Like, I can't wait until it's just part of culture, to listen to disabled people and to respect them and treat them better, and to have their voices more prominent in the publishing industry. And just in media. Hand in Hand by edited by Carol Ann Duffy. This is an anthology of love poems. This poetry anthology, best poetry anthology I read this year. Only poetry anthology I read this one was great. Really enjoyed it. I just think love poems are the best poems. And I think they're the most powerful poems. Love poems and grief poems, and often those are the same poems. So something about when people are in love, just all the emotions are on high, and poets who can capture that, we love them. So this is a collection of, I want to say 72 poems. It's 36 poets have chosen 2 poems each. It's 36 men and 36 women. And it's all love poems, and a lot of them are Anglophone. There's like 2 or 3, I think, that have been translated from different languages, but most are Anglophone poets. It's not necessarily super diverse, but it is, I think, the quality of writing in this collection, like, I don't know if you can tell, but like almost every poem in here I've tabbed to come back to, because it's like they're so well written. And I think if you're a poet, there's a lot to learn of like craft and expression and imagery and stuff like that from this collection. But if you're just someone who's wanting to read a few good poems, this is also just a phenomenal collection to dip into. Really stands out, and I stan Carol Ann Duffy. She's amazing. I love her poems as well. Sadly, she doesn't actually have any poetry in here of her own. She's just the editor of the collection, but it's really fantastic. So yeah, I don't know why I keep saying that. Fantastic. Really fantastic collection. Loved it. In the Dream House by Carmen Maria Machado for number 3. Wow. I don't even know what to say about this one. I read Carmen Maria Machado for the first time this year, and I could not put this book down. I am obsessed with Carmen Maria Machado now and will read anything that she writes. This book is about her toxic relationship, her abusive queer relationship with her girlfriend while she was in grad school. It narrates in second person, so she addresses you as in addressing herself in the past, but it really feels like she's addressing you, the reader, and really puts you in a state of tension throughout the book. The writing is so good. The abuser, her ex-girlfriend, is never named. She's only ever referred to as the woman in the dream house. And this is like a motif, that's the dream house, the idea of this ideal world, ideal place, ideal house, ideal home that her and her girlfriend are trying to build, but also the fact that this is a dream house and like all of the horror tropes and themes that come along with this idea of a haunted house, a house in the sky, a house that doesn't actually exist on this plane and doesn't follow the rules of a normal house. There's just something so surreal and horrifying and terrifying about the way that she describes what happens in her house, in the dream house, how the woman in the dream house treats her, the extreme like love and then the extreme terror that she feels, and the way that she could never see that coming, mixed in with all of these, moments, because it really is like a book of really short chapters. You can see there's a title on almost every page. So it's really gripping, it's really reading, and it's really compelling. But amongst these personal memoir anecdotes and, reflections, almost diary entries, you have these almost academic or journalistic explorations of media and popular culture that talk about queer villainy and the trope of queer villainy, and the fact that often queer people in popular culture and in media are represented as the villains, but how that didn't help Carmen see the villainy or the truth of the abuse that she was going through until much later. And it, the lack of representation and the effects of that on her and on whether or not she was able to recognize what she was going through as abuse. That's also a massive theme of this memoir, but it's just so it's just so powerful, and it's just so well written, and I literally couldn't stop reading it. And I've since read her short story collection, which is also phenomenal. I would put both of them on this list, but I feel like that's a bit overkill. But just, you gotta read it. You gotta read it. Then the penultimate book on this list is Grief is a Thing with Feathers by Max Porter. I feel really weird about Max Porter. He's a real hit or miss for me. I love this book. I hated Lanny, his second book. I am on the fence about whether to pick up a third book, but I really enjoyed this one. I'm not sure if I mentioned, but I lost my grandmother, my maternal grandmother, last November of 2020. And that was really challenging, and the grief that I was feeling, I couldn't really express. I couldn't really write. I couldn't really emote beyond these moments of just breaking down and into tears. And reading this book was one of the first moments since she had passed that I was really able to, I think, make a step forward in my grief. I think this is a really phenomenal book if you are going through grief to read. I really appreciated the characters, especially the father. So basically it's about a father and his two sons who've recently lost the mom in the family. The mother dies, and the father is just kind of forced to figure out how to be a single parent, parent these two little boys, and the boys have to figure out how to live without their mom. And it's really short, and it's written also quite it's quite sparse language and very much in an experimental way. I think Max Porter's style is very experimental. What happens in the book is basically there's this character called Crow, who's this creature. It's a massive crow. He's based on Ted Hughes's poetry collection called Crow, which depicts grief as Crow. And so Crow basically comes into their lives and forces them to confront him, and it forces them to confront their grief basically in the ugliest and most painful of their emotions, and that's how they're able to work through their feelings, and that's how they're able to move on. So that's basically the idea. But there's this opening section in it where it's literally the first few pages where the mom's just died, and there's just this description of what it's like when you've just lost someone, and then all of these people that you barely know and you barely care about come and they flock around you, and they flock around this terrible event, and they try to fix it, or they try to talk about it to you when you literally can't even fathom that it's just happened. And there's this disbelief and this surreality in grief, and there's an anger and a pain and a guilt that comes along with it that is just, I think Max Porter just really hits the nail on the head with it. I think he really does a good job with it. And it really helped me. And I really appreciate this book for that reason. I haven't reread it since. I would really love to reread it again because it's just so short, and I did read it in a day. But it's really left an impact, and it's really beautiful, and would recommend. And now we finally made it, you guys, to the final book, my most favorite book of the year. And it's gonna sound so weird that this is the book of all those books that I just mentioned, political books and poetry books and books that you guys are used to hearing me talk about, because that's kind of my reading. This is a little bit out there. This book my favorite book of the year, my favorite book of 2020. I literally just read it yesterday, and it's gotten me out of a little bit of a reading slump I've been having, and it made me cry, and it made me feel so many things, and it brought me so much joy that I'm 100% sure about my decision to officially announce that this is my favorite book of the year. It is The Boy, the Mole, the Fox, and the Horse by Charlie McKeesey. Oh my gosh, you guys. This is a little graphic novel. I don't even know if it's a graphic novel. I don't know what to call it. It's an illustrated book of interactions between a young boy and a mole, which is so sweet and so cute, and immediately makes you chuckle at the beginning with the way that it's written. And then they meet a fox, and the fox gets involved in these conversations, and they're just having these conversations, and then the horse comes along and they meet the horse, and they form this little band of friends, and they're just talking about their insecurities, and they're talking about their hopes and their dreams and their fears, and they're just making each other feel better. And it's so beautiful. I literally cried, and maybe that tells you more about like my December and how hard it's been. This was exactly what I needed. I like picked it up at the perfect time. This is exactly what I needed. It's such a beautiful book. Like, again, I can't even, like, the style of like illustration in here is just so like visually pleasing and so imperfect in the perfect way, and it's just a beautiful book. And I feel like it would be the perfect gift to get someone who's been struggling, to tell them that you love them, to tell them that, you know, you care about them and you care about their well-being, because I genuinely think this is the book that I wish I had read as a child, but it's also a book that I know has impacted me so much more because I read it as an adult. And I don't believe necessarily in like children's literature being only for children or anything like that. It definitely comes across that way in the publishing industry, where it's like marketed towards children or marketed towards adults. But this book really defies that. I think it's such a quick read. You literally sit down, you can read it in half an hour, but the thoughts in it and the sentiments of, you know, what it means to be successful is just to be loved and to love. You know, what it means to have a friend is just to be able to be imperfect, and the fact that love doesn't require you to be extraordinary. You can just be this ordinary person who's totally worthy of love, and it's just so sweet. It's so heartwarming. I just loved it so much. So much. Best book of the year. Definitely a book that is the best book of 2021, because 2021 was such a hard year. But anyways, yeah, those were my books, you guys. Thank you so much for watching. If you made it all the way to the end of this video, I'm really hoping I can cut it down to like 20 minutes or something, but we shall see. Thanks for sticking around this year. If you have been watching my videos throughout the year, it's been a mess. I know it's been a mess, you guys. I'm hopeful that next year will be a little bit better, that I can produce some better stuff that I'm more proud of next year. But I just really appreciate you. If you've reached out to me at any point throughout the year, if you've left a comment, if you've liked the video, if you've watched it, like, I just really appreciate it. I'm sending you all the love. I hope that you're doing super well. Let me know before you go, what was your favorite book of the year? Have you read any of these? Did they make your list too? Let me know. I'm super curious about your reading and how that's been this year, and what books have done for you. Have they brought you joy? Have they expanded your mind? Have they challenged you? Have they brought you comfort? Let's talk about books in the comments, and I will see you very, very soon in 2022. It's already 2022. I'll just see you soon. I'll see you when I see you. Okay, bye.